If you're watching this, this is Training Think Tank's movement variation playlist. This is one of the movement tools that we use to teach and prescribe movement. Most people, from discussions I've had in the past, they think of movement as something that they want to do with correct technique. And oftentimes they go and seek experts that are claiming to be able to teach you how to move correctly in a specific pattern. Without digging too much into neuroscience, experts are able to actually generate patterns of motion in more ways. So they actually have more variability in spite of looking like they are robotic and able to express their motion in the same way repeatedly over and over and over and over again. They actually are creating and generating those patterns in much more varied ways than amateurs are able to do so. And if you think of sports as well, you think of a lot of teaching culture with something like a golf swing as being like, oh, this is the correct golf swing. But if you watch an actual golfer play golf, they're hitting from elevated stance, the ball above their feet. They're hitting low shots, high shots, right to left shots, left to right shots, shots with a driver, shots with a wedge. And each one of those is a different pattern that they have to generate over time. So variation is something that you see expressed at an elite level in any sport, not just a skill sport like golf, but in any sport. And I think that there are really two major reasons why variability is a major component of elite level movement. The first is that contracting in the same way, like the same way over and over and over repeatedly, will start to create the same wear and tear signature on the joints. And I found if you express motion with a bit more variability, you can become a bit more balanced in terms of the muscle activation patterns and the stability of joints. That allows you to do skills more regularly and not have pattern overload issues as regularly, not get tendinitis-like symptoms as regularly. And by doing that, you create a positive association with something because you're not dealing with pain all the time. You're allowed to have more longevity doing such. And by doing things for a longer period of time, you have more time to progress and you have more time to evaluate the nuance of the sport. And therefore, you can become an expert over time. So I think that's one reason why movement variability is such a major component of elite athletics. The second is simply that skills are tested in so many different ways in sports. So if you look at somebody that competes in CrossFit and has to use a snatch versus a weightlifter, a CrossFitter is going to have to test the snatch sometimes light, sometimes heavy, sometimes after running, and their hamstrings and glutes and core are all going to be really taxed and their diaphragm is going to be breathing hard. So how to stabilize and be able to actually contract after something like that is going to be different than if I were sitting for 5 minutes prior to the lift. They might have to use 70% of their 1RM, they might have to use 90% of their 1RM, both for repeats. So that way, if you're training and you're doing singles and resting 3 minutes and singles and resting 3 minutes, and now I have to hit 90% 3 times as fast as possible, I might only get 30 seconds rest or 90 seconds rest between those. And I need more variation with my ability to express that pattern and recover. So if you lack variability of motion and I get tested after doing something like chest to bars or doing something like running, and I can only do something in one way in one specific circumstances, my lack of variability will make me a less effective athlete in a specific sport. So movement variation is extremely important in elite athletics. Outside of that, you see it applied in training really commonly. So in bodybuilding, you'll see variation as one of the major tools that people use to actually create adaptation over time. So instead of doing bicep curls one way, they'll do them extended range of motion. They'll do them with dumbbells. They'll do them with dumbbells with fat grips. They'll do them with barbells. Do them with easy curl bars. They'll do them with cable pulleys. They'll do them with making changes to the wrist angle. They'll do them with creating rotation as they're going down and up. And by doing that, they create variance in the muscle belly contraction, and therefore they can work on creating more symmetrical aesthetics over time. You'll see it in CrossFit. So obviously we talked about that in terms of how it's tested, but you'll also see it in terms of the manipulation of the standard of movement execution. So in the 2018 Open, bar-facing burpees mandated that you hop back and hop up, as opposed to what a lot of people were doing that they created a more efficient pattern for over time, where they were hopping back and stepping up. And that manipulation of standard actually changes how everything's working inside your body, how you're able to breathe, what needs to be elongated to get into a position optimally. So it's something that could potentially be enforced upon you, not even just in a testing scenario, but something that you should put in your training to be able to improve your ability to respond to variable circumstances really quickly. And then you'll also see it in grappling sports. So I know it was very common in wrestling for our coach to put us into a position where somebody had our leg and to work on specific defenses, that it's working on a defense from a bunch of different positions. So, all right, take the leg. Okay, now you're going to fight off trying to stop them from taking you down. All right, reset. Now they take the leg and they put us into a different position. And you're constantly working on your escapes, being able to get out from a bunch of different variety of positions in terms of where your opponent is relative to you. So movement variation is something that you see in so many different training disciplines, and it's something that we wanted to create a specific training category for that will allow you to systematically think about changing the confines of a movement to help an athlete perform movement in a variety of ways. I touched this briefly, that elite athletes have more variability which they can execute movements with. But in training, to make this concept a little bit more relevant or practical, let's use a couple examples. So let's say you're overhead squatting and you begin to get wrist pain. And every time you put the bar overhead, it creates a very weird sensation that you're not comfortable with, and you realize that it's not a good idea to continue. So the first thing you do is you go find a therapist to work on you, and you're happy with the treatment plan that you get to heal the issue, but you know it's going to take a little while to heal. But you have a competition coming up in 8 weeks, and you need to train the movement in some form because overhead squats or snatches are going to be tested because you got the workout. So you have a percentage-based lifting program that you normally follow, and you know that you can't do that anymore. You can't use the barbell because it's creating too much compression on the wrist, and if you continue to hammer that, it's going to undermine your confidence on game day, and you want to be healthy and at your best on game day, as opposed to trying to be stubborn and push through the pain in a training environment today. So instead of accumulating volume of overhead squats with the barbell, you find things that don't cause pain, that put you in a similar position where you can still condition yourself, but potentially not as specific as using the barbell. So you can use dumbbell variations, you can do kettlebell variations, you can do sandbag variations where maybe having an open hand and holding the sandbag overhead will allow you not to experience that wrist pain. So that allows you to train the pattern a bit, still condition your legs, still condition your torso to stay upright, still condition your respiratory muscles to be able to breathe while you're upright. I know the specific adaptation to impose demand principle that you need to be doing the thing that you're gonna be tested in to get better at that specific test. However, if you can't do that safely, there are creative ways to navigate around that so you continue to get better, and this is where movement variation training comes into place. Let's look at a second example. So let's say you're preparing someone to compete at the CrossFit Games for the first time, and you need to improve their running capacity. What I did in my past, which I think is a mistake, and I see a lot of coaches now do the same thing, is you put athletes on a running program that is very systematic and based on, physiology research, based on programs derived from multi-sport athletes like triathlon coaches, or programs that are derived from track coaches. But if you think about that, the demands of those sports and how repetitive they are and how more importantly, how predictable they are, because you know exactly what you're doing. If I am coaching a 800-meter run specialist, I know that on game day, that athlete is running an 800-meter run on a 400-meter loop with a specific surface with specific shoes. So training them for that specific test is much easier in the fact that I know so many more of the variables that their body's going to be able to have to deal with. But if you look at the CrossFit Games thus far, running has been tested barefoot in the sand. It's been tested on trails with hills, inclines, declines, crawling mixed in. It's been tested on a track surface when running was put into a Metcon. It's been put into Metcon where running was done on a concrete surface. It's been done at regionals on a treadmill. It's been done with running at full speed, sprinting straight ahead and change of direction. So putting somebody on a very systematic run program that's designed for, getting somebody better at 5K running is not going to be able to improve and upgrade their ability to effectively cope with all of the potential demands that could come out. So as you get somebody prepared for the CrossFit Games, having movement variation as one of the things that you're paying attention to in terms of the overall exposures to that specific skill over time will allow them to be exposed to more of the fatigue signatures they're going to get from a varied test. Now, there is still a place for a progressive run program over time, but instead of focusing on that in the preparatory time to the CrossFit Games, that might be some off-season stuff that you do. And as you get closer, you might be focused more on being able to give the athlete variation in terms of their run exposure so they're fit. Their feet, their knees, their hips, their ankles, their breathing can all get self-organized in any specific task to more effectively deal with the fatigue than if they were doing the same type of running over and over and over and then asked to do a completely different style of running. So these are just two examples to illustrate how movement variation training can become a very effective tool for improving somebody's movement for a variety of different goals. What you'll see in these videos are some visual representations of movement variation. Most people who write training programs that I've met who are earlier in their careers don't really have a wide vocabulary for exercise selection. And I consider training a mix, a blend of a science and an art form. And if you compared it to an art form like writing, we start with ABCs in our toolbox, and we're very simple in terms of our application. But over time, if you want to create good works of art that other people actually want to read, you need to understand things that are a bit more complex, like sentence structure, having a deep vocabulary of words to choose from, understanding the principles of storytelling, and whatever else makes somebody a good writer. So similarly in training, you can probably get people to a pretty high level of fitness with very basic movement selections, enough intensity and enough discipline. But if you want to move in a variety of different patterns and you want to be variable in your ability to express motion with your body, you do need to practice in a variety of patterns. So I didn't try to illustrate the thousands of movements that I could potentially put into a program. But what I did want to do is I wanted to take some barbell movements and just show some variation that you can impose with specific barbell movements and patterns. I wanted to take some bodybuilding movements. I did that earlier in my career, and so I don't have the facility equipped to do aesthetic-based training at the highest level. So I just chose some very basic drills for people who would like to accessorize with arm work, for example. I did some with CrossFit movements. This could help you understand, like if you look at the burpee example in this playlist, or if you look at the box jump category or video in this playlist, you can get an understanding of how you could write a program with a bunch of different standards that allows an athlete over time to practice a bunch of different styles of moving in a specific testing format. This way the athletes don't get caught up or caught off guard because Dave Castro decides to change a standard, and they're very neurotic and OCD about being able to move in the same way. So every time I do bar facing burpees, I have to step up with my left foot, jump up and rotate to this side, and then all of a sudden the standard changes, and now that person is panicking because they haven't practiced doing anything else. So you can have a go-to movement that you feel is much more comfortable to be able to operate and repeat under high levels of fatigue. However, being able to expose yourself to the variety is something that would be very effective for you as a CrossFit athlete. So you'll see some of those examples in this category. You'll also see me perform what are called matrices, and that's something that's kind of taken from Gary Gray, and he teaches, but this is a concept that's applied to a bunch of different movements, and they can act as a warm-up, they can act as self-directed movement work, they can act as a cool down, they can act as a way to decrease systemic tension, they can act as a way to impose just variance on somebody. So as an example, if I were doing the push-up matrix for a wrestler that is trying to get more comfortable with the bottom position and being able to push their upper body up off the floor with their hands in a bunch of different spots. So this is where the concept of not having right or wrong styles of movement, if you're training somebody for something chaotic like wrestling, if I tell somebody, well, the push-up has to be done like this, with the scapula like this, and the midline like this, and the pelvis like this, and I'm teaching a wrestler to do that, and they have to be able to push their upper body up off the floor with an opponent grinding their head into their mat and laying all of their body weight on top of their back. They have to have a variety of different pressing options to be able to press and push back and keep their hips in the proper position to be able to escape. So something like a matrix, a push-up matrix, can be an effective training tool for being able to give to that person to get them into a position where they can push from a variety of different angles. So the movement variation here in this category was supposed to give you an understanding of how to select exercises and manipulate them relative to your athletes or your specific training goals. It was not intended to give you a full list of all the exercises that you could potentially choose from. It's supposed to teach you how to manipulate exercises in a bunch of nuanced little ways to be able to expose to the body to more variance in its expression of a specific pattern. Like is true for all the movement playlists on our YouTube channel, this is one of many that acts as a part of a bigger whole. So to improve your movement quality, you need to go through all of the movement tools playlists and think of them as acting synergistically with one another to, over time, be able to improve your movement quality. For anyone that's taken the movement course, Chapter 3 covers movement tools, and in the movement tools, we cover all of these more extensively. I cover where the inspiration for each category comes from, how to write training prescriptions with each tool, how to progress the training tools, what each specific movement tool is used for, and you've seen sample programs that utilize all of these over the course of 4, 6, 8, 12 weeks. And so you'll have a much better understanding of how to think about this in terms of long-term progress. As you go forward now, you have everything that you need to get better. You have every tool from a movement perspective that we could think of. You understand how to use them, you understand why to use them, and you have a bunch of videos in each playlist that illustrate the actual use of those movement tools. So good luck, and hopefully your movement quality gets better.